Everyone has already heard of the 80-20 rule or the Pareto principle, where 80% of the outcomes come from 20% of the causes. But in this video, I want to explain why I think a 90-10 rule is considerably better. And I first came across this idea in Nassim Nicolas Taleb's work, The Black Swan, in which he calls it the barbell strategy. And also, can we just take 5 seconds just to appreciate this absolutely beautiful front cover on the hardback edition? I absolutely love this. But anyway, in this video, I want to explain two things. One, what that strategy actually is and what it refers to. And two, how it actually applies to all areas of life, not just to economics. So in terms of this, what actually is it? Well, if you imagine that you have a barbell in front of you. So if you go to the gym, you might already know what a barbell is, but if not, I've drawn a little picture for you here, where you've got the weight evenly stacked on either side. And that's what I want you to notice first of all. Imagine that you have to lift this off the ground and it weighs 100 kilos overall. The weight isn't distributed evenly. The bar itself weighs 20 kilos and the other 80 is going to be split on the extreme end of the bar. So it's actually 40 here, 20 here, 40 here. That makes it much easier to lift compared to if it was 100 kilos that was going to be evenly distributed. And now in economics, the barbell strategy operates under the same idea. The idea that you don't want to spread your money equally across all your investments because some are going to be higher risk than others. So you've got to take that into account. So the money needs to be placed appropriately on either side of those extremes. Now, what Taleb gives example of is 90% in extremely safe areas and 10% in speculative areas. And as you can see, that means that the middle ground is going to be completely ignored because it falls under neither extreme. But what I want to focus on in this video is how this applies to far more wide areas than just money matters. And if you take into account my library building project, for example, and if you're new here, by the way, I talk about a lot of psychology and philosophy book recommendations, excerpts from them, ways to study them, anything to help guide your inner work and self-discovery. But 90% of my books fall under this category of respected books in the field of psychology and philosophy. So if we take, for example, Abraham Maslow in his book, which I've recommended before, Toward a Psychology of Being. This helps to form the backbone of my coaching and my mentoring service, and any book that I pick up that is referenced by another book is probably going to be quite a safe bet. But every now and again, every 1 in 10 books, to keep in line with this, is I choose a book that is going to be a bit more of a rogue choice. It might or it might not pay off. It might or might not be useful. So for example, an example of that book might be Hands of Healing Light, which is a book on Reiki and healing in the human energy field. That might look like an extremely random choice for a book considering what I'm doing, but it only makes up 10% of my library, so it makes up a speculative bet. It's a book that might pay off, but it might not. Another example of that is the actual Black Swan book itself. This is going to fall under that 10% category because I've got very few books on economics because it wouldn't make sense to base 90% of my library on this genre of book, given what I'm trying to do as a career. So when we look at this, we've got this idea of experimental bets. So if I was to move this along a little bit further, let's say some of these are going to be experimental and speculative. 90% of these are safe and they are very traditional if we were to map all of that out. So another way of viewing this is if I only read the books that everyone else is reading and recommending, then I'm not going to have any unique voice at all because I'll be taking in exactly the same information as everyone else. It's that speculative 10% that potentially adds a new twist to the repetition that I just see over and over and over again. And this can apply to way more areas of life than just what I'm talking about here. So for example, if you like to keep up to date with technology, then 90% of what you do should be the familiar technology that you're used to, the safe, the stable technologies that are already widely adopted. And it might be the 10% is going to be on the more cutting edge advancements. Let's say you're going on holiday. Well, it might be that 90% of your plans could be what you traditionally associate with going on a break, and 10% could be pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and trying something new. If you enjoy cooking, it might be something like for your next meal, 90% of the ingredients and the spices are going to be what you're familiar with, but 10% might be the extra experimental side. It might ruin the meal, and that is the real risk in all this, but it might also surprise you in a really pleasant way. So just have a think about it. Like, where might something like this actually apply in your life? Because the options are realistically, they're endless. But the point itself is simple. Rather than distribute all of your effort and resources evenly, how can you move towards this 90-10% rule? 90% extremely safe and conservative, 10% experimental and speculative. That's one of the rules I'm operating under when I'm building this library, as well as in my running practice, as well as coming up with new ideas in client sessions. But anyway, I don't want this video to get on for too long. If you're interested in more book recommendations and explanations of some of these key concepts in these books, there's plenty more videos like this to come, so you can feel free to subscribe or to follow this playlist for more. But I would say in the meantime, read The Black Swan if you liked this idea. And that is the barbell strategy, which is found within this book.